first question that we're going to do together, hopefully together because you guys are working with me, is calculate the direct labor cost note, or we're going to complete the direct labor cost note, or we're going to show a calculation. Okay, so remember guys, direct labor, the factory workers who physically make the product, direct labor. Don't confuse that with indirect labor. Right, so let's now look at our information in much more detail. And the information that I need to look at is information for factory workers in the production process. So the number of factory employees working directly on the scooter, unchanged throughout the year, is 12 workers. Number of normal time worked by each factory worker during the year is 1,600 hours. Then I've got number of overtime hours worked by each factory worker during the year, 240 hours. Then the wage rate, 60 Rand per hour. And the wage rate for overtime is 100 Rand per hour. Okay, so let's use this information now to calculate firstly wages, and then we'll look at overtime. So let's start off with wages first. And guys, I'm doing the calculation here because it's much easier for me, but remember, you need to show your calculation in your answer book. Okay, right, so we're going to start off with the actual wages. So we've got 12 workers, okay. The number of normal working hours is 1,600. So clearly I'm going to multiply that by 1,600. And the rate that they earn per hour is 60 Rand. So remember, I'm looking at wages and not overtime as yet. So times that by 60 Rand. Right, so we've got 12 workers who worked for a total of 1,600 hours. And for each hour, they earn 60 Rand. So let's calculate first their wages. And let's get the calculator out. Okay, let's move that. Okay, so we've got 12 times 1,600 times 60. Okay, and that gives us the wages for the year, an amount of 1 million. Okay, 1,100,000 and okay, 1,152,000. Okay, let's just double check that. That is correct. Right, so this amount, let me now take it through to my note. So wages, remember you are showing your calculation in brackets, and your wages for the year, 1,152,000. Okay. Right, now let's look at overtime. Remember, the overtime still deals with your factory workers. So back to that information. So we're now focusing on overtime. Okay, so once again, we've got 12 workers and the number of hours that they worked overtime, right? A total of 240. And the overtime rate is 100. So easy guys, 12 times 240 times 100 will give you the overtime wages. So let's get that out and let's do the calculation. So 12 times 240 times 100, and the cost for overtime, an amount of 288,000. Okay, so again, let's take that through to our actual answer sheet, 288,000. And again, I'm reminding you guys, you've got to show me the calculation in brackets. Okay, right, now still with direct labor. Remember, we sorted out the wages that the factory workers earn, the overtime that they also earn, but now let's look at additional contributions. Now remember, over and above their wage, the employer might also contribute towards pension. They might also contribute towards medical aid, towards UIF. So that becomes an additional expense and it falls under direct labor cost. So let's go to our information and let's see if there is any additional contributions. Okay, so there we go. We've got UIF contributions. Okay, and if I look through my information, there's no other contribution. So my UIF contribution, remember, it's only for your factory worker. So your factory worker, an amount of 11,520. Why not the factory foreman? Because that is indirect labor. It has nothing to do with actually making the product. Okay, so let's take that through. UIF contribution. Let me just fill that in. So we've got UIF contribution, and the contribution for the year, an amount of 11,520. Okay, right, all we've got to do now is total. So in total, our direct labor cost for this financial year, okay, let's just move that. We're simply adding up, guys. So plus 1,152,000, that was our wages, plus the 11,520, which was the UIF contribution. So our total direct labor cost, an amount of 1,451,520. Okay, right, 6 marks for something like this. Not difficult, grade 12s. Okay, not difficult at all. Right, let's now move on to factory overhead. So the second part of the question wants us to calculate total factory overhead cost, and they want us to draw up the note. Now remember, again, I'm reminding you guys, when we talk about factory overheads, we're talking about indirect costs that relates to the factory. Okay, so all your indirect expenses, but it's got to relate to the factory. So we're going to start off first with indirect material. Right, now remember guys, indirect material refers to your packaging. It could refer to cleaning agents or whatever that is used in the production process. So my indirect material, I'm going to start off with my opening balance. So let's go back to our information. So at the beginning of the year, okay, so at the beginning of the year, your indirect material stock was 7,700. So remember, we're going to start off with beginning of the year, 7,700. Right, to this, we are now going to add purchases. So how much of indirect materials did you buy during the year? So let's go back to our information. And remember, we are focusing now on indirect materials that were bought during the year. So as I scan through my information, remember, I'm looking for indirect material, and there we go. So indirect materials purchased, an amount of 125,900. Okay, now before I enter the 125,900, very quickly also check for any indirect materials that could be returned. Okay, so if we look further down, right, indirect materials, there's obviously nothing about indirect materials returned, but please remember, if you do come across any returns, you're going to obviously subtract returns. Okay, so indirect materials purchased, no returns, so let's enter that in. So indirect materials purchased, an amount of 125,900. Okay. Right, so what have I done so far? Opening balance plus purchases, and finally, I'm now going to subtract my closing balance. So let's go back to our information. And remember, we're still dealing with indirect material stock. At the end of the year, your indirect materials not used, or your closing balance, an amount of 6,400. So let's fill that in. remember you're going to subtract the 6,400, okay, in brackets. Right, so guys, this calculation worth at least 4 marks. So I just want to write out some kind of formula for you. So we started off with opening balance. We then added purchases. If we had returns, please remember you will minus returns, but obviously there wasn't any returns in this case. And you're going to obviously minus closing balance. And that is going to give us the indirect materials that we ended up using in the production process. Remember, you are dealing with expenses. So indirect materials used is your expense that needs to be recorded. Okay, so let's quickly get the calculator out and let's do the calculation. Okay, I just want to clear that. So 7,700 plus my purchases of 125,900, and I'm going to minus 6,400, and that gives me an amount of 127,200. So let's fill that in, 127,200. Okay, right, as I said, 4 marks for that particular calculation. Let's move on. So still with our factory overhead note, let's now look at our indirect labor. Okay, so indirect labor, remember this would be your factory foreman, the factory cleaner, the factory security guard. And the word factory comes up all the time. It's got to relate to the factory. So let's go back to our information to see if we have any indirect labor. Right, so if we look through the information that is given to us, we've got obviously our factory, so we've got salaries for the factory foreman that is given. Okay, so immediately this is my indirect labor. Right, office worker has nothing to do with the factory. Then I've got wages, okay, nothing in terms of the factory. We dealt with our direct labor. And then I've got UIF contribution, again, for the factory foreman, and this would be indirect labor. Okay, looking through the rest of the information, there is nothing else. Okay, so I'm going to obviously take 241,000, and to that, I'm going to now include 2,410. Okay, so let's do that. In our answer sheet, okay, so the factory foreman's salary, an amount of 241,000 plus the UIF contribution to the factory supervisor, an amount of 2,410, and that will give me my indirect labor. Okay, so let's add that up, 241,000 plus 2,410, and that gives us 243,410. So 243 and then 410. Okay, right, again guys, not difficult. Right, let's move on and let's look at other expenses relating to the factory. Okay, so back to our information. Okay, so we've obviously dealt with indirect material, we've dealt with indirect labor, and let's now scroll through the rest. Sales, obviously not an expense. Commission to the salesperson. So remember, commission is obviously selling and distribution, has nothing to do with the factory. Right, advertising, another expense that has absolutely nothing to do with the factory. So selling and distribution. Then I've got factory maintenance. So clearly factory maintenance, 85,000 relates to the factory. So here's my next overhead. Okay, so factory maintenance, let's fill that in. Okay, so factory maintenance, no calculation required. It was given to me as 85,000. Okay, so easy. Right, and if we look further down, okay, so done with factory maintenance. Now we're coming across bad debts. Now remember, guys, go back to my diagram that I drew at the beginning. Bad debts, you've got to sell the product before there is some kind of bad debts that needs to be written off. So remember, guys, bad debts has nothing to do with the making of the product. It's once the product is sold, the debtor runs away or vanishes and doesn't pay his account, and then you write that off as bad debts. So bad debts, obviously nothing to do with my production cost statement. Right, then I've got rent to be allocated in proportion to floor space. See information 5 below. So here we've got our rent, but remember, it doesn't mean the entire rent is only for the factory. So let's look at information 5 to see how we're going to allocate rent expense. Okay, right, so the information that they're giving me is the square meters. So obviously my entire factory. Then I've got my office and I've got my sales department. So let's work out the percentage in terms of square meters. Okay, so remember, in total, 1,200 plus 600 plus another 600. So the total square meters should be 2,400. Right, let's work out the factory as what portion is for the factory. Let me just move that quickly. So 1,200 divided by 2,400, right, times 100, and the factory should be 50%. Okay, so remember, once again, I'm only interested in the factory. I'm not interested in the office. I'm not interested in the sales department for this particular question. Right, then they go on to also tell me the rent for March 2018 has been paid in advance. Right, so they're giving me a year-end adjustment. Now remember, guys, whenever you are doing a manufacturing question, you will come across year-end adjustments, and please treat all year-end adjustments exactly the way you would do if preparing an income statement. So what am I referring to? I'm now referring to your GAAP principles, and in particular, I'm talking about the matching principle. So March 2018, if I had to quickly draw my financial year, so if you look at your current financial year, okay, the year starts on the 1st of March 2017, ends on the 28th of Feb 2018. So let's just write that down, 1st of March 2017, 28th of Feb 2018. Now, they are clearly telling you that the rent for March 2018, so March, right, the rent for 2018 March has been paid in advance. Now, the matching principle clearly tells me that if it doesn't belong in this particular financial year, I now need to adjust my rent amount. In other words, I need to now subtract the rent that was paid for the next financial year. Okay, so let's do that. Let's now subtract the 12,000 and then we are going to allocate our costs. Right, so the total rent paid is 133,000. So let's just take that through. So 133,000. We first will subtract 12,000. So you always take the year-end adjustment into account first, right? And then we are going to allocate 50% of the cost to factory overheads. Okay. Please, guys, often in the exam when we're marking your scripts, we generally find this mistake where students will first allocate the 50%. So in other words, they first take the 133,000 times 50%, and then they want to subtract 12,000. So immediately that is incorrect. Okay, so remember, year-end adjustment, take that into account first. Right, so 133,000 minus 12,000, let's get that calculator out again. So 133,000 minus 12,000, okay, times 50%, and that is giving me 60,500. Okay, so the 60,500 is what I am now going to take to my factory overheads. All right, so let's do that. So 60,500. Okay, and this is the rent expense for the factory. Okay, right. As you can see, I obviously ignored the office. I ignored selling and distribution. Okay, right. How are we doing on time? I think, well, we have enough time today. So let's continue. I know you guys probably want a break, but I think let's try and finish this note and then we'll take a break. Okay, next bit of information deals with water and electricity. See information 6. And then we've got depreciation where they want us to see information 7. Right, now as you can see, guys, information 6 and 7 is actually missing. Okay, but that's not an issue because we can always write the information down. So the information reads as follows. Water and electricity, 15% of the amount is allocated to the office and 25% is allocated to the sales department. The rest applies to the factory, and they haven't given us the percentage that applies to the factory. Remember, this is what we are interested in. They also tell us water and electricity for February 2018 was not paid 1,200. So they're obviously giving us a year-end adjustment. Right, so let's start off by calculating what is the percentage of water and electricity used in the factory. So remember, the total is obviously 100 minus 15% is for the office. Then 25% of the expense is allocated to the sales department, which leaves us with 60%, which is for the factory. Okay, so the factory is obviously 60%. Right, so once again, before I actually allocate 60% to factory overheads, I need to take into account the year-end adjustment. Okay, so the year-end adjustment, water and electricity for February 2018 was not paid 1,200. Right, so if we go back to our timeline, remember February falls in my financial year. As you can clearly see, it falls in my financial year, which means I now need to include the 1,200 in my water and electricity expense. Okay, so let's do that. So I'm just going to quickly extend the page. So my water and electricity from the table. Okay, let's find that quickly. So water and electricity is sitting at 36,000. Okay, so 36,000. I am first going to add on February's water and electricity not paid. So plus 1,200 because it belongs to this financial year. It needs to now be included. And then I'm going to allocate 60% to my factory overheads. Okay, so once again, guys, can you see I'm taking into account the year-end adjustment? Okay, right, so let's get the calculator out. 36,000, okay, plus 1,200, right, times 60%, and water and electricity allocated to the factory an amount of 22,320. Okay, right, so let's take that through to our note. So water and electricity, once again, and I'm going to keep on repeating myself, show your calculations in brackets, and for the factory an amount of 22,320 is obviously the 60% that is allocated to factory overheads. Okay, almost done, guys, almost done with this question. So let's now look at the depreciation and repairs. Now, if you look at the table given, you would notice that they're already giving you depreciation on factory equipment, 52,000, but they're also telling me to see information 7. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to first bring through the 52,000, so depreciation, right, in brackets 52,000, and now let's go to the additional information to see if we need to adjust this figure. Okay, so the additional information given to me. New factory equipment purchased on the 1st of February 2018 for an amount of 12,000. Repairs, and I just want to include repairs on equipment, right, for the factory was also done on the same day for 780 Rand. And then they tell me depreciation at 10% is written off on the cost price method. No entries have been made. So clearly I bought new equipment for the factory. This was not recorded, which means no depreciation was provided on the new equipment that was purchased. So let's calculate our depreciation. And once again, guys, I love the timeline. Okay, as you can see, 1st of March 2017, 28th of Feb 2018. My new equipment was purchased on the 1st of February. Okay, so somewhere here on the 1st of February, which means I owned this new equipment for 1 month of the financial year, which is the month of February, and I now need to depreciate this by 1 month. So my depreciation as follows: the cost 12,000, okay, times your rate of depreciation, which is 10%. And remember, I'm depreciating this only for 1 month because I only own the asset for 1 month, so 1/12. Okay, so my depreciation for this 1 month or for this financial year on my new equipment, 12,000 times 10%. Okay, let's just fix that, and then divided by 12, and that should give us 100 Rand. Okay, so that is my additional depreciation that I need to show in my production cost statement. Right, now the repairs, remember guys, repairs on the same day on factory equipment, 780, has nothing to do with depreciation. But the repairs, however, needs to also be shown as an additional expense. So let's record our depreciation first. So we're obviously including the 100 Rand. And then if you want under factory maintenance, you could have included the 780, or you can just show it separately as repairs to equipment and nothing for you to calculate an amount of 780. Right, depreciation. So my total depreciation, 52,100. Okay. Right, long question, but that's accounting, guys. Questions are normally quite long. Let's go back to our table to see if we've left anything out before we add up. Okay, so I'm given sundry administration expenses. So again, the word admin has nothing to do with the factory, so I'm not going to include this. Sundry factory expenses, 25,000. So obviously part of the factory needs to be shown. So let's just fill that one in. And I've got 25,000 as my sundry expenses. And remember, it's for the factory. Okay, right, quite a long note, 20 marks allocated to this note. So all that's left for us to do is total. Okay, so let's quickly do that together. Let's add up. Right, I'm sure you guys can do this much faster than me, so you guys must just bear with me. 127,200 plus 243,410. Okay, then I'm adding the 85,000. Okay, checking the zeros there, plus 60,500. okay, plus 22,320, okay, then adding the 52,100 plus 780 plus 25,000. Okay, and that gives me an amount of 616,310. So let's fill that in. 616,310, all for 20 marks. Okay, right, we got quite a bit covered, guys, but remember, it's not the end of the question. So we're now looking at the production cost statement. So remember, once again, the production cost statement, go back to that diagram that I drew in the beginning. Okay, there we go. It's everything relating to the factory and what was my cost of production. That is your whole purpose. Remember, that is what you're trying to calculate. So I manufactured scooters. What did it cost me? What was my cost of production in this particular case? Okay, so let's go to your production cost statement, and we're going to start off with prime cost, which is obviously my direct material cost. And remember, guys, you should know your format. Direct material cost plus my direct labor cost. Okay. Right, direct labor cost, we obviously calculated this already. So let's start by filling in this figure first. So my direct labor cost, there's that figure, guys. Okay, so I'm going to simply take that through. Oh, there we go. Right, so my direct labor cost, an amount of 1,451,520. Okay, just want to quickly darken that block because that's missing. Right, and now let's look at our direct material cost. So remember, direct material cost, you're looking at everything in terms of raw materials. So direct material cost, you are going to start off with opening balance. So direct material at the beginning of the year, okay, an amount of 59,900. To this, you are then going to add your purchases. Okay, so looking at the information given, right, and I'm now looking at my table, raw materials purchased for cash and on credit, 1,600,700. So that's my purchases, 1,600,700. Okay, all about knowing your format, guys. Then, was there any returns? So remember, if there's returns, you're going to obviously subtract your returns. So raw materials returned to suppliers, 23,100. So minus returns, 23,100. Okay, I'm just going to put that in brackets so I know I'm going to subtract. Right, then carriage on raw materials purchased. So please remember, guys, carriage increases the value of your raw materials. So you're obviously going to add carriage on purchases. So your carriage on purchases, an amount of 28,800. You're obviously adding carriage. Then I've got more information. So they're telling me raw materials stolen from the warehouse. Okay, so remember, if there's any loss of raw materials in the form of theft, in the form of fire, in the form of simply damage of raw materials, that will decrease the value of your raw materials. It's gone, right? It's been stolen. It's not there anymore. So obviously, I'm going to subtract what was stolen, an amount of 960. Okay, right. And then finally, raw materials at the end of the year. So how much of raw materials were on hand at the end of February 2018? You're going to clearly subtract your closing balance. Okay, so at the end of the year, my raw materials on hand, 30,300. So 30,300, and again, I'm going to quickly put that in brackets. Okay, so as you can see, guys, lots and lots of marks for this one calculation. And again, you've got to show your calculation. Remember, in accounting, it's all about showing your calculation so that you're getting those part marks. Okay, so my direct material cost, because that's what I'm trying to calculate. So let's get the calculator out. Let's quickly move that. Okay, so we've got 59,900. Okay, I'm adding the 1,600,700. Then I'm subtracting 23,100. Okay, then I'm adding 28,800. And then I am subtracting 960, and then finally minus 30,300. Okay, and that's giving me a figure of 1,635,040. So let's just quickly write that down. Okay, 1,635,040. And obviously, we're taking that through to our production cost statement. Okay, so 1,635,040. And again, you either showing your calculations in brackets, okay, or you telling the examiner exactly where your calculations are. So remember, guys, generally try and do your calculations on the same page as the question. If you don't have enough space, then use another paper or another sheet in your answer book, but make sure that you reference your calculation. Okay, and when I say reference, it's easy, right? You can just say direct material cost calculation, and the examiner or the marker will definitely look at your calculation. Okay, right, so my prime cost. So my prime cost is simply an addition of these two amounts. So plus my direct labor, 1,451,520, and that gives me an amount of 308. So let's just write that down. 308. There was a 6 there. Let's just quickly check. Okay, 6560. So 6560. Okay. Right, then the next line is obviously for factory overheads. And that was the calculation we did earlier on. So if we go back, our factory overheads, okay, here's my total here, guys. So my factory overheads, I'm simply taking that through, an amount of 616,310. Okay, right, at this stage, total manufacturing cost. So remember, your total manufacturing cost is direct material plus direct labor plus factory overheads, or it's your prime cost plus your factory overheads. Okay, so let's do that quickly. I've got my prime cost already, plus factory overheads, 616,310, and that gives us a figure of 3,702,870. I just want to quickly double check that. Yeah, that looks correct. 3,702,870. Right, almost done, guys. Work in progress at the beginning of the year. So if we go back to our information, right, we've got work in progress. Again, remember what I said earlier on, do not swap these figures. So beginning of the year, end of the year. So beginning of the year, let's take that through. Okay, 100,500. Okay, this is just a calculation line. Work in progress at the end of the year. Okay, needs to be subtracted, an amount of 110,900. So let's fill that in. 110,900. Right, so now I'm ready to calculate my cost, or the total cost of production for the year. Okay. Right, so I'm going to show it as one calculation. You guys please show your calculations on the appropriate lines. So all I'm doing, guys, is I'm taking my 3,700,2,870. Okay, I am adding work in progress at the beginning of the year, so plus 100,500, and I am minusing the 110,000, let's fix that, 110,900, okay, and that's giving me the total cost of production for the year is 3,692,470. So we're down to the last question. If the business uses a markup of 100% on cost, calculate the selling price of one scooter. Okay, so immediately the first thing we need to do is calculate what is the cost price for manufacturing one product, in this case, one scooter. So how are we going to calculate the cost price per unit? We're going to take our total manufacturing cost. So in this case, 3,692,470. And we're then going to divide this by number of units manufactured. So let's go back to our table. I think it was 58,000, but let's just quickly confirm that. So units produced, 58,000, right? And that was the total cost to manufacture 58,000 units. Let's just go back there. Okay, so I'm going to now divide by 58,000. And that should give me a cost price to manufacture one scooter. Okay, don't know why I did that because I had that amount there already. Let's just enter it again. So 3,692,470. Divide that by 58,000. I might get decimals. Yeah, I do. So it costed us 63 Rand and 66 cents to manufacture one scooter. So 63 Rand, 66 cents. Now, if I now add the 100% markup, remember guys, all you're doing is you multiplying by 100 plus 100, which is 200, divided by 100, or you can say just multiply by 2, either way, doesn't matter. So if I multiply that by 2, my selling price will be, so 63 Rand 66 cents is my cost price, times that by 2, and one scooter will be sold for 127 Rand. Okay, let's just get that again, 32 cents. Okay, and that was for 4 marks, so not difficult.